everybody. Back again, this time taking a look at the village elders of the Bionicle universe, the Turaga. And in particular, a character that nobody asked me to make, Turaga Onewa, but I have to make him because I need him for something fun that I'm working on down the road. I've been really looking forward to delving into the Turaga for some time. I think there's something very fun about the idea of a robotic shaman leading a tribal group on an island, and I think they offer up a lot of very interesting visual possibilities. Ways to communicate age and backstory visually. I think a lot of that stuff is going to come into play here. So, Onewa is the leader of a desert village called Pakoro. It is a community of builders and artists, and I view their artistic style as being very reminiscent of brutalism, but I also view it as being non-perspective, like a lot of pre-Renaissance art. And that's something that I just kind of want to keep in the back of my head while I'm working on the Pakoran characters, but also on their architecture. Now, for Onewa, this comes into play directly through the engravings on his armor, but also in the art that will be adorning his ritualistic shawl. So I really want all of my designs to reflect what this world must look like to the Matoran. The Toa should look huge, the Rahi should look terrifying, and the Turaga in particular should look wise, but also quite mysterious. I think that the one piece of media that has influenced me the most regarding the Turaga would be the Mystics from Dark Crystal. In fact, I think you're probably going to hear me reference Dark Crystal a lot over the course of these videos. Now, the Po-Matoran are a very optimistic people, but when we first see them in the story, they are suffering under a plague of unknown origin. So my approach to all of this musically is that it should have a bounce, a real ethnic quality to it, but at the same time, it should be very somber. There's a hint of something darker. And what's so interesting about this narratively is that it's the first window that we really get in the story to explore how the Matoran view death. Because they're not like us. They have incredibly long lifespans, and they can't reproduce. So when one of them dies, it is not only a very unexpected event, but it's hugely tragic. That is a piece of the Great Spirit that is gone forever, that will not be replaced. And it's a fascinating exercise to imagine how this would manifest itself culturally in a very ritualistic tribal society. Okay, onto the hand. Now, I want to make something that is very reminiscent of the hands that they have in the toy, which is basically nothing more than those little axle holders, right? So I want to make a hand that resembles that. Specifically, what I'm doing is making a hand that doesn't necessarily have fingers, but has 4 thumbs that can wrap around the tool, but might not be particularly useful for anything else. To further visually represent the idea of age, I want to make him look a little bit more top-heavy, a little bit hunched over, so I'm going to add this shape onto his back that's kind of like a turtle shell. Now, this isn't necessarily a design element that I'm going to be incorporating into all 6 of the Turaga. I'd like to keep them as individualized as I can. I want you to be able to see them in a lineup and be able to pick them out just based off of their silhouettes. So we're going to add this shape there, and I really like what that's doing. I think that's working well. I've talked in the past about how my approach to these characters is that they're basically a mess of fleshy tendrils built up inside of a shell. I think that's going to be far more apparent with the Turaga than with other forms of bionicle life, seeing as they were once Toa. They had grown to that size, and now they've shrunken down into the frame of a Turaga. I'm kind of thinking it's going to look like a fat guy who's lost a lot of weight, right? You have this flesh that has been stretched out that is not built for a body that is now this small, so now it's kind of sagging and hanging off the bones, which simultaneously also helps to signify age. I'm gonna try not to get too grotesque with it, but let's see where it goes. Moving on to the head. Now, I do feel like I'm dialing the heads in a little bit more with each one that I do, but one thing that keeps dogging me, I feel, is the eyes. Now, I like the idea of a circular pupil. I like how expressive you can make that look, but I recently went back and watched the old Miramax stuff again, and I gotta say, those lights, that just screams Bionicle. So there's definitely a part of me that wants to go back and update the old models to reflect that design a little bit more. So why don't you let me know in the comments if you want me to do that, or if you want me to stick with the Nightmare Eyes. I want to do something very much in line with the original Matoran head design, something with these elements extending off of the jaw. I think that should help frame up his cheekbones really nicely, give us something really distinguished. And that should about do it. Ladies and gentlemen, Onewa. Okay, everybody, thanks for watching. There'll be more in the next one. Why don't you leave a like, leave a comment? And by the way, is it Onewa, Aniwa? I honestly have not known for the last 20 years, so why don't you yell at me in the comments about that one?